Distinguished members of the United Nations Security Council, I'm here today on behalf of the Philippines to discuss the recent crises of North Korea. Over recent months, the DPRK has engaged in a series of provocative acts, including the unprovoked attacks on Japanese maritime vessels within Japan's exclusive economic zone, a direct challenge to maritime law and regional norms. Additionally, North Korea has launched ballistic missiles towards Guam, explicitly armed with chemical warheads, a clear escalation that threatens the security architecture of Northeast Asia and by expansion, global peace. These developments take place against the backdrop of long-standing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, where decades of conflict remain unresolved despite multiple diplomatic initiatives. North Korea's actions exacerbate an already fragile security environment, risking a wider regional conflict that could engulf East Asia and also impact global stability. The Philippines, while not directly a party to the Korean conflict, recognizes that peace and security in Northeast Asia are linked to the stability and prosperity of Southeast Asia. Our economic, strategic, and people-to-people ties with South Korea, Japan, and the United States position us as a stakeholder deeply invested in peaceful resolutions. The disruption of critical maritime trade routes passing through East and Southeast Asia threatens lifelines of regional economies, including the Philippines. Under international law, North Korea's attacks constitute grave breaches of several legal obligations. The principle of sovereignty of territorial waters are enshrined in the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, or UNCLOS, which protects rights of coastal states such as Japan to exercise control over their EEZ. The targeting of Japanese vessels within these waters constitutes unlawful use of force prohibited under Article 2 of the UN Charter. North Korea's justification invoking the right to self-defense lacks merit under Article 51 of the Charter, which mandates that any self-defense action must be necessary and proportionate in response to an armed attack. The attacks were unprovoked and disproportionate, failing these criteria. Furthermore, the deployment of chemical warheads contravenes the Chemical Weapons Convention, to which North Korea is not a party, but is bound by customary international law prohibiting chemical weapon use. The use or threatened use of chemical weapons violates international humanitarian law and presents serious threat to civilian populations. The detention of North Korean seafarers raises additional legal concerns. Under the Vienna Convention of Consular Relations and the principles governing humane treatment of detainees, their rights must be respected. Any abuses or violations in this regard would exacerbate this crisis. The unfolding conflict has predicated a humanitarian crisis marked by mass displacement of South Korea and Japan, with spillover effects expected across Southeast Asia. The influx of refugees would strain resources in host countries, many of which, including the Philippines, are still recovering from recent natural disasters as well as economic challenges. International refugee law, notably the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 protocol, requires that displaced persons be afforded protection and assistance. Regional states must be prepared to meet these obligations while coordinating with international humanitarian agencies. The humanitarian crisis extends beyond displacement to food security, access to medical care, and protection of vulnerable populations, including women and children, who are disproportionately affected by armed conflicts. The Philippines has a proud history of contributing to peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, and regional cooperation through ASEAN and bilateral partnerships. Our experience in conflict resolution, humanitarian response, and diplomatic engagement positions gives us a credible voice for multilateral dialogue. ASEAN's constructive agreement, emphasizing dialogue and confidence building, should be harnessed to complement Security Council efforts. Strengthening cooperation among a regional organization and major stakeholders is critical to a sustainable peace process. The Philippines will provide a few different possible Security Council responses, and what our recommendations are. The first is a military intervention. While some may advocate for military action as a deterrent, the risks are extremely profound. Escalation to a full-scale war, extensive civilian casualties, and unpredictable regional fallout. The legal threshold for Security Council authorization is high, and such measures must be proportional and necessary, and the Philippines does not recommend this course of action. The second course of action is economic sanctions. Sanctions have been a mainstay on international response to North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Targeted sanctions can degrade military capabilities and limit resources for further aggression. However, sanctions must be carefully calibrated to avoid exacerbating civilian suffering, ensuring humanitarian exemptions and monitoring mechanisms are in place. Again, the Philippines does not recommend this option. The third option, our preferred option, is a multilateral diplomacy and humanitarian assistance. The Philippines advocates for an urgent return to comprehensive diplomatic efforts, including reviving six-party talks or similar frameworks, engaging all regional and global stakeholders. This path prioritizes de-escalation, compliance with international norms, and a humanitarian response that addresses the immediate needs of affected populations. The Philippines respectfully urges the Security Council to issue a strong condemnation of North Korea's violations of international law, including unlawful attacks and the use of chemical weapons. Demand an immediate cessation of hostilities and provocative actions that threaten regional stability. Call for the swift resumption of inclusive multilateral negotiations at peaceful resolution. Endorse targeted sanction regime focusing on military and nuclear capabilities, coupled with humanitarian exemptions and safeguards. Establish a Security Council-led humanitarian coordination mechanism to support displaced persons and vulnerable groups. Monitor the treatment of detained seafarers, ensuring compliance with international safeguards. Promote enhanced cooperations with ASEAN, the East Asia Summit, and other regional bodies to foster comprehensive security architecture. The Republic of the Philippines affirms its commitment to the maintenance of international peace and security through principled multilateralism, respect for international law, and humanitarian concern. We call upon this Council to act decisively and with unity to address this crisis, uphold the rule of law, and safeguard the lives and dignity of all affected. Thank you for your attention.